You're listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast.
Welcome back to The Whole Truth podcast. I'm Paul Armstrong. Thanks for joining us. We return to the lithium industry this week with a great chat with Ken Brinsden, well known to you through his times, going right back to Atlas Iron. Of course, he was one of the key drivers behind Pilbara Minerals as it grew into a major company, and now he's the chief executive of Patriot Battery Metals, which owns a huge lithium deposit in Canada and is on a fast track to project development. Ken is at the coalface of the lithium industry, if you excuse me mixing my metallurgical metaphors there. He has great insights into a very opaque industry, and hence his commentary at conferences and other places is always so well appreciated by investors who are trying to get a handle on what the hell is happening in the lithium game. It's no secret that Patriot shares price, like everybody in the lithium space, has been sold off for some time. The question is there now a golden counter-cyclical investment opportunity as the world gets new technology, the Trump geopolitical ding-dong plays out, and the world looks for non-Chinese sources of lithium and lithium chemicals to make into batteries? Ken gives us some great insights into what he sees as he travels around the world talking to suppliers and buyers in this industry. He knows the game inside out, and he also talks about some of the latest technological developments and why he has made a decision on his own energy supplies at home and where he landed on his assessment of the pros and cons of solar panels and batteries. You'll really get a lot out of this. It's very interesting, and Ken's a great speaker. Ken, it's been a very big week in the lithium industry, although the news from BYD has been somewhat lost against backgrounds of federal government budgets and the usual geopolitical turmoil and the like. But of course, this week BYD announced that it can now recharge an EV in 5 minutes, a major breakthrough in the technology. What does that mean for the lithium outlook and for Patriot?
Oh, isn't it incredible how quickly the industry is moving? This is just one more example of how quickly the new energy industry as a whole, but also the lithium subset of the industry is moving. And it won't surprise you, I guess, that it's all about China, at least in the short term. BYD's announced the ability to, incredibly quick charge and recharge in an EV.
I mean, in essence, from my reading of it, Ken, it says that essentially, and this is my words, not theirs, of course, that you can now recharge an EV in the same time, basically, as it takes you to fill up your petrol tank.
Yep.
That's a game changer, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The average consumer's always been a little bit fearful of what they don't know. And the two things that get talked about a lot in the adoption of an EV is the range and the period of time it takes to recharge. So how is the technology changing? Well, again, this is just one more example. BYD is a bit of a breakthrough, the speed with which you can charge the battery. Clearly, that's one of the barriers to entry for EV, but you could argue the technology is going to bust through that in no time. And on the question of range, well, arguably similar dynamics are unfolding. I want to point out another really important technology change is the way we hybridize vehicles. So the historical norm, we all think about the Toyota Prius, you have fundamentally a petrol car that collects a bit of energy in a battery, a small battery, and then reinserts it back inside a petrol car. Well, it's fair to say the next evolution of hybridization is to completely reverse that. You have an EV with a small amount of petrol for generation of energy to recharge the battery while you're driving. It's basically the complete reverse of the classic hybridization model, and it's happening because of China and the speed with which they're lowering the cost of the cells.
So what you're saying, Ken, in essence, is that the petrol motor now is just to back up the electric motor, not the other way around.
Exactly. And it turns out this is going to be cheaper than historical applications of hybrid technology. And I think it's a really big breakthrough for people worried about adopting their first EV. I'm not sure everyone should fear that question of range. I don't think it's actually that big a deal. But for those that do, there's this concept of range extension of an EV using a small petrol motor.
Now, we can't talk about Patriot and the lithium market without it being tied into the whole geopolitical turmoil and the trade wars and tariff wars and all those lovely cliches that we're bombed with every 5 minutes these days, Ken. But essentially, you look at this ding-dong that's going on between Canada, where, of course, your project is, and Trump, and it's getting pretty ugly between neighbours there. But is that actually, in a twisted sort of way, good news for Patriot? Is it so to say, hey, this is going to heat up here and Canada's got the lithium that the US will need? If Trump is successful in revitalising the US auto manufacturing industry, presumably a big element of that is going to be EVs. You can't, I don't think anyone, even Donald, would suggest that you can rebuild Detroit on the back of 6-litre V8s anymore. So the idea that they're going to need more lithium, they don't have a lot of lithium, do they? And Canada, like Patriot, has a lot of lithium. Is this going to open the door here in some shape or form?
Yeah, my poor Canadian mates, their heads are spinning with how quickly the relationship has changed. But I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that Canada is part of the US solution to the lithium-ion supply chain. There's incredible endowment in Canada and especially Quebec, and our project being one of the more important ones, in which case it's highly likely that we're part of the solution.
Well, he wouldn't be, presumably Donald wouldn't be saying that Canada should be the 51st state of the United States if Canada didn't have something they want.
Oh, definitely. There's a prize there, and part of it is going to be the critical mineral sphere and lithium. Yeah, I've no doubt that Canada is going to be part of their solution. And in fact, you could argue that Trump is just looking a gift horse in the mouth there. He should be a bit more careful about
or he knows that he really hasn't got a lot to work with here. Canada's got these metals, particularly lithium, that the US is going to need, and therefore he's trying to negotiate the best deal rather than sit back and get done over.
Sure. Yeah, definitely more to play out here. But if you want a new supply chain in North America to support the future of the car industry there, you definitely need Quebec and Canada as part of the solution. It feels like that's a very, very natural way for the whole industry to evolve.
But in Patriot's case, you certainly haven't got all your eggs in the Trump or US basket, have you? Because you've got the arrangement with Volkswagen.
Yeah, so we see ourselves, and I think Quebec should as a whole, see ourselves as both part of North America's solution, but equally part of Europe's solution. Quebec is really well placed for product to flow through to Europe. And of course, there's close relationships there too. So I reckon Canada should double down on those relationships. They're key to our future. We definitely see ourselves as part of North America's solution, but equally part of Europe's solution. They have no natural competitive advantage in lithium raw materials, nothing like what Quebec and our Shakajuanan project offers. So, yeah, we would say we're part of the solution.
Now, the US and Europe has really only got two choices here, haven't they? They continue to buy Chinese battery chemicals and the like, or they source it from Australia, Canada. So when you look at it in that context, it does put the Australian and Canadian producers in a box seat. Ultimately, the trade war, if it plays out the way it looks like, and the war's going to get divided down the middle, then Canada and Australia is going to be perfectly positioned to substitute at some point the Chinese supply.
Yeah, so the key is matching what are the world's best resources typically. I'd definitely put ours in that category. And some of those in Western Australia are the premier resources globally. The missing link is the chemicals piece. Now, it's been a hard road to hoe, no two ways about it. Those chemical plants have been hard to build, but there's plenty more innovation to come in the industry. And I would suggest that those chemical facilities, they do get constructed in the West. There's already some successful examples. POSCO in Korea being a notable one that Pilbara is involved in.
So are the Koreans having success with that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. No, I think that's.
Are they closing the gap on the Chinese? Let's face it. This is the key question here, isn't it? There is a great opportunity. The world does look like it's going to be divided down the middle in this respect, or many respects. But if you're going to say, hey, there's a trade war coming here, we need to get alternative suppliers to China. The problem is at the moment there is no real alternative supply in battery chemical, is there?
No. So you can only do one of two things. You invest in your own supply chain, and that might yet be a very sensible solution. Or you, in fact, invite the Chinese to come and invest locally in the supply chain.
Right.
Now, if I was Trump, I'd be thinking that's actually a pretty pragmatic solution. I could sell that as yes, the Chinese investing in the US or even in Canada, but at least they're US and Canadian jobs. That might be a very pragmatic solution. But if you're not going to do that, then your only other alternative is to invest in the supply chain yourself. Now, there are examples where it's working, and POSCO being a notable one. And I'd suggest that there's going to be more over time. There's also more innovation to come in the supply chain too, and we feel we've got an important part to play in all that with our project. If you're going to build a new project in the hard rock category, why simply follow the China model, shipping spodumene, to North Asia? Why not look to alternatives that simplify the supply chain, localize the supply chain, I'd be pretty confident in saying solutions like that are going to emerge in the period of time that we're developing our project.
That model that you just floated, Ken, about inviting the Chinese into the United States and to build the plants there, that's essentially what they've been doing for many years, isn't it? I mean, they've got Tesla operating there. They've had any number of foreign companies, the Japanese companies building cars and other things in China. So they've adopted that model. Come and invest here, build it here, bring your technology and your know-how here, but do it in our backyard. And you're saying time to turn this around and say to the Chinese, bring your know-how to us.
I think it's a pragmatic solution for the future of our industry. If we genuinely want to decarbonise the global economy, we might as well take advantage of the smarts that have been developed in China, and in the end, they'd be part of our solution. And I'd also make the point that actually the Chinese themselves would welcome that opportunity. They are looking for opportunities to participate in the next big markets, and clearly North America and Europe are absolutely the next big markets beyond China themselves. So would they happily invest? I think the answer is yes, they would. They'd do it tomorrow if the door was open.
So how close is Patriot to be able to become a player in this? You just announced some great exploration results this week. The size of this deposit has never been the issue. It's really a case of how fast you can progress this, isn't it?
Yeah, so the team is working about as hard and as fast as you practically can. They've done an amazing job actually in the last 12 months. The progress of our feasibility study, which is coming out in the September quarter, and the ESIA in support of our mine authorisation, they are all now very, very mature, and they'll be presented during the course of this year. That's a pretty incredible milestone when you consider that the discovery was only made in November 2021. So here we are, roughly 4 years later, and we'll be set for mine authorisation. So yeah, Quebec is a good place to work. The team is working really hard. We've raised money in support of the continued development of the project. We think we've got the right partners like VW and PowerCo to help support our development initiative. All those things put us in the box seat for near-term production.
Now, you say the feasibility is set for completion in September, so you've got, and the environmental assessment process is also almost done. So there's a lot of news flow and key catalysts coming here, but you already know a lot from the rather unfortunately named P, the acronym for, Preliminary Economic Assessment. Now, your P showed what the financial returns will look like.
It's a strong project, Paul. What makes it a great project is a combination of really key criteria in the hard rock world. High grade, including subsets of the resource that are incredibly high grade, actually globally leading, even actually in some respects even better than Greenbushes. So there's a lot to like about the grade in the resource, the scale you've already mentioned. There is very, very low cost power and renewable power in Quebec through Hydro-Quebec. Industrial rates for power, 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour. There's virtually nowhere else around the world where you can get power that cheap. Last but not least, relatively low strip ratio and DMS-only recovery. What that means is our spodumene comes out of the pegmatite easier than most. It only requires dense media separation. We don't have to go through the complexity of flotation to maximise the recovery. And that makes for a simple and low-cost operation. So they're the key criteria that make it one of the premier projects globally.
Now the Patriot share price, to be brutal, has been sold off along with the rest of the sector as the lithium bubble burst. But if you take a view as an investor, a counter-cyclical view, if you like, Ken, and say, well, the pain's been taken along with the rest of the sector, orphan obviously in that respect. But you could argue that Patriot's had a particularly difficult time of it in the sense that you've gone through that phase of a mining stock where you've been doing studies and metallurgy and a lot of the more sort of eye-glazing things that one must do along the journey to ultimately bring it into production. It's not as exciting as the early exploration phase. They do call it the death part of the cycle of a mining share, but you're coming out of that, aren't you, with the completion of the fees? So is it a case that a counter-cyclical investor could look at it and say, well, the pain's been taken, we've done a lot of that eye-glazing but necessary work behind the scenes, we've almost finished that, and now we're into this particularly exciting time where whatever's going to come of the whole Trump tariff shake-up of the world means that Canadian lithium is going to be in big demand one way or the other. So you put all those sort of tailwinds together and you say, hey, this is, if you're into counter-cyclical investing, opportunity knocks.
Yeah. Oh, look, our industry is fascinating. It's a young industry still, and it's growing off a relatively small base. That's what's contributed to the volatility. It just doesn't take that much in the supply-demand balance to rearrange the market, and clearly we're going through one of those painful cyclical lows. I'd be reasonably confident in saying we're through that part of it. That part of the cycle, I think, is now behind us, and demand has not gone away. In fact, as much as people talk about, say, EV sales falling away in the West, actually lithium raw material demand has pretty much stayed rock solid in the last 4 years at somewhere between 25% and 30% growth per annum. It hasn't changed. So it's not really a demand issue. What's happened is on the supply side, where China got more active in the market and they went to some very unusual sources of supply. So that's what's impacted the supply-demand balance, which in turn has affected the price. But what's important to note in all this is that there's two things that are, I think, highly likely to motivate the next phase. The first is the strength in that demand. The demand has not changed. It's been in that range I described. Let's say nominally 30% demand growth per annum. There's very, very few minerals that are going through that sort of demand growth consistently year on year, and its potential to accelerate. I'll come back to sort of the demand story to explain where I think the industry is going. But on the supply side, a lot of what China had developed to support supply was fundamentally not sustainable in the market. And you've already started to see elements of that fall away. In contrast, there has been pretty consistent demand through stable Western supply, like that in Western Australia. You know, that's been pretty much rock solid through the cycle and continued to be shipped. So if the market is truly oversupplied, why don't you ask yourself, where is the product being pushed back? Well, I would argue it's being pushed back domestically in China and pushed back from Africa. Those supplies that were not really sustainable for the medium and long term in the market. So in the face of that continued demand and the questionable supply base, I think we should be looking to price correction and now in the right direction. That's actually the future of our industry.
So where does this take the whole demand-supply equilibrium, brackets, the price?
Yeah. As I said, I'm pretty confident that we're through the bottom in the cycle now. And what we should be looking towards is the demand in that lithium raw material. Now, there's some pretty fundamental changes that are happening in the market that are very, very strong motivators for demand. And one of the keys here is the speed with which China has lowered the cost of lithium-ion cells. When I first started back in the industry, 10 or 12 years ago now, the holy grail was $100 kilowatt-hour cells. And that was the tipping point for the value in an EV versus an internal combustion engine car. But the price that China is selling lithium-ion cells today is $50 to $60 a kilowatt hour. Now, that's a relatively recent phenomenon. China halved the cost of the cells over about the last 12 or 18 months. And today, they're $50 or $60 a kilowatt hour. You know, nearly half the cost.
So what's the implications of that?
Well, what it does is it grows the addressable market, basically where those cells land. And it's here that China is clearly in front. If you can sell cells at $50 or $60 a kilowatt hour, they're going to make their way into batteries on the side of everyone's house in Australia, probably in the US as well. Anywhere where the sun shines, people are going to naturally be motivated to capture the free power during the day in a battery. And if the cells are cheap enough, the economics of that make perfect sense and you're a buyer. But even at a grid scale now, to support the rollout of broader renewable networks. So
you mean on a commercial basis?
Exactly.
Here.
Yeah.
So we're getting away from just saying this lithium market and price is being driven by EVs. It's now being driven by domestic batteries and now onto commercial batteries.
And grid scale batteries, that's right. So this market is emerging because of the speed with which China has lowered the cost of those cells. Now, interestingly, China has already constructed a lot of cell making capacity that's not being utilised. That's just what China does. They typically build capacity ahead of
They build it and they'll come.
Yeah.
You might say, Xi Jinping would say, we build it and they'll come with Chinese characteristics.
Honestly, it's so true.
That's true. Yeah,
it is. And you look at the history: solar panels, wind farms, typically coming out of China, the turbines and the generators. As I said, solar and now batteries. Batteries are the next big tipping point in the global energy scene, and lithium-ion cells are the winner. They're the winner because China has fundamentally lowered the cost of those cells at a rate.
So you're saying by lowering that cost, you're opening the door to a huge amount of demand. The economic equation of batteries and renewable energy versus conventional energy is changed dramatically.
Dramatically is the right word. Stationary energy storage globally is a much, much bigger market than EVs. And lithium ion, on the face of it, appears to be the winner because of the speed with which China has lowered the cost of it.
Here's the question. If you're a politician, I'd put this to you. So, Mr. Brinsden, if you're so in favour of these batteries, have you got one?
I've got one.
You've got one.
Thanks for asking.
He's passed the test.
Exactly. No. We've been through this process, and the economics are compelling. You can pay back the cost of that battery in 3 to 4 years. So the logic now is, if you have the capital and you have excess solar on your roof, you might even think about capturing lower cost power and selling it back to the market at a later date, or collecting it free from the solar panels you've already installed on your roof. It makes absolute sense.
So you've done all the economics of this, and let's face it, you've spent many years assessing the economic pros and cons of projects right back to your iron ore days, and as you say, with Pilbara Minerals and the like. So you're probably better placed than just about anyone out there in punterland to work out what the tipping point is of investing in renewable energy at home. What did your equation find?
Yeah, no, it's now compelling to buy the battery. It is. If you've got excess solar on your roof, you should capture it and store it during the day. And then
what about the argument that goes that don't worry about the solar panels, put the battery in instead, invest your money in that, and load the battery up with cheap off-peak power provided to you by the utility?
Spot on. And that might very well be where you should go. Now, the very point you're making here is actually the defense mechanism for legacy networks. What do we do as we rebuild our networks for the future of energy? And there is no doubt in my mind that batteries, and probably lithium-ion batteries in the majority, are the way to go. They are going to stabilise our network, and people that own those batteries are probably going to be making money out of them. It's how quickly the industry is moving. And as I said, it's all about the speed with which China's lowered the cost of those cells. It's a game changer.
And coming back to Patriot, then, that means obviously what you're saying here in essence, Ken, is that there is a big demand growth coming here. There's big demand growth coming amid not much supply increase, and certainly not from sort of, Eastern and African sources. So as this demand grows, producers such as Patriot will be ideally placed to capitalise on it.
Yep,
we're about to go to the next chapter of the whole lithium industry.
Yep. No, I do. I've seen enough in the cycle now to appreciate that yes, it's complex and it can be volatile as a small industry starts to become a bigger and bigger industry. Some of that volatility will get washed out as the industry continues to grow, but I have no doubt there has to be another incentive price in the market to facilitate the next rounds of growth that are required to support supply while demand continues to grow at 30% per annum. That's huge growth off a larger and larger base every year. You need a lot more lithium raw material to come out of the ground.
Right, Ken, we better let you go. It sounds like you've got enough to keep you busy and then some. Thanks very much for your time today.
Pleasure to be with you, Paul. Thanks.
You've been listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast, produced by Resource Media, hosted by Paul Armstrong for Reed Corporate. Please note that Reed Corporate does not provide investment advice, and investors should seek personalised advice before making any investment decisions.